Alright, let's talk a little bit about Jimmy Page's post-Led Zeppelin projects. And by this, I mean projects that don't really have anything to do with Led Zeppelin, so I'm not going to talk about the remasters, I'm not going to talk about Page and Plant, and I'm not going to talk about Page and the Black Crowes. Instead, I'm going to concentrate just on the projects that Jimmy did more or less outside of his work with Led Zeppelin, and this also excludes the Honey Drippers. So let's get started right away with a project he did called Lucifer Rising. Now, this was supposed to be a soundtrack for a Kenneth Anger film, and this project has a lot of stories about it and a lot of myth attached to it. And it sounds very exciting because you have Kenneth Anger and Jimmy Page collaborating on this kind of openly occult Crowleyan musical and movie project. They have a falling out, and then the task falls to a character known as Bobby Beausoleil, who ends up being involved with the Manson family and going to prison for murder, and he ends up completing the Lucifer Rising soundtrack while he's doing time and inventing the guitar synthesizer basically for Sony as he's serving a life sentence for murder. So all that would lead you to believe, wow, where there's smoke, there's fire. There must be a lot of music here to listen to between Page's version of it and Bobby Beausoleil's version of it, but both versions of the soundtrack are basically a snore. Unless you're into synthesizer, guitar-generated moodscapes that are kind of pseudo-sinister, I mean, that even gives it too much credit. I just find Page's particular take on it really boring. They sound like introduction part to In the Evening, extended for 18 minutes or whatever it is. And the reputation of this project certainly doesn't live up to how it sounds. The next one that I would put on here is Whatever Happened to Jugular, which was a collaboration between Page and Roy Harper, and it's an acoustic-based, folk-based project, which sounds, again, very exciting on the surface because Page's incredible talents on the acoustic guitar and Roy Harper's well-deserved reputation for being a folk historian. But when they get together, there's just no real chemistry between the two of them, and I find it hard to listen all the way through. I think there are moments on it where they sound okay, but they just don't have that magic. They just don't fit together quite right. Roy Harper's voice is rather thin, not so great. The next one I would point out would be what's known as the XYZ demos, where Page was getting together with ex-members of Yes, and they were putting together a potential project. Well, the demos of this, they're not official releases, of course, but they're leaked all over YouTube, and there's some good stuff on here. I mean, one thing that all of Page's post-Zeppelin projects have in common is there's no more Jimmy fiery lead guitars. There's no more extended solos. There's no more of that contrast of light and shade that was so dramatic in Led Zeppelin. Instead, he moves more back to his roots as a studio musician and a rhythm guitar player, and he's experimenting with different shades of the guitar to complement overall arrangement. He really does start to fade a bit out of the spotlight as a musician, but the XYZ demos show that his imagination is still perfectly intact. Okay, so Outrider, his first solo album, was his only official solo album, and like the other projects we're discussing here, there's a conspicuous abundance of guitar on the album, but there's a conspicuous absence of guitar at the same time. So what it's like is you're listening to all these guitar tracks that he's put on here, and it's Jimmy all right, but there's just something not happening. There's just something that's not right about it. And so the next project would be his work on the Death Wish 2 soundtrack, where you get to see Jimmy Page use the guitar and the guitar synthesizer and all of his various tricks in the studio to create purely atmospheric music, which you could tell he always had a drive toward doing that, even in Led Zeppelin. It's one of Led Zeppelin's signature attributes, is that they openly use atmospheric elements. And so I think that he was a natural fit to do soundtracks, and this one is a really good one. And the movie is not so great. I mean, it's okay, but it's not a spectacular cinematic achievement or anything. The soundtrack's way better than the movie. Alright, so moving up to number 2 on my list of best Jimmy Page post-Zeppelin projects would be his work with David Coverdale on the Coverdale-Page album. So it also sounds a bit dated. It is kind of like 70s stadium rock or late 70s, early 80s, and it has a feeling of being kind of hastily thrown together. Page definitely did all the production on it. He plays harmonic on it, he plays some bass on it, he plays a lot of guitar, but again, you're hearing a ton of Jimmy Page guitar, but you're not feeling it. You're not getting Jimmy Page from the Led Zeppelin era at all. This doesn't sound... Alright, so moving up to my number one post-Zeppelin project is The Firm. A lot of people don't like The Firm, but I do, and I think that even though their material wasn't the strongest, it kind of would have been interesting to see if they would have made a couple of more albums. The material might have developed a little bit better, and then some of their pop songs, like Satisfaction Guaranteed and All the King's Horses, are really good, solid 80s sounding pop songs. And so I think, again, while you don't get that ripping, Whole Lot of Love and Dazed and Confused, or even the deeply inspired Stairway to Heaven type thing, you do get a good solid band. So those are my opinions of Page's solo stuff. In a future video, I may take a look at what Robert Plant has done in his post-Led Zeppelin career and assess his accomplishments. And until then, if you have a thought on this or any other topic connected to classic or contemporary music, please comment in the section below. And remember to like and subscribe. Thanks a lot.